When interviewing for a job, what are questions you should be sure to ask your interviewer? One I have not seen mentioned yet which I always think it's a good idea to ask is the following. Would you mind talking me through what an average day for someone with this position would look like? It's good for a few reasons. First, and most obviously, it gives you a more anchored idea of what your day will be like beyond the general things the job description says you'll be doing. It's also a subtle way to get some information that it might not be great to come right out and immediately ask for what time am I expected to clock in and out. When's lunch? It'll also give you a sense of how structured the day is, which is a big deal for many people. Finally, it'll help you understand what the people hiring, and theoretically managing, you are like as bosses. They can tell you reasonably well what you can expect each day, probably have done it themselves, or at least pay enough attention that they'll give a damn about you as an employee. Can't describe it well at all. Get out of there. Anything that can give you a sense of the office culture is valuable. As a coder, I usually ask about things like regularity of meetings, whether it's an open office, what code styles are enforced if any, and OS distribution, workstations. The latter is especially important, because if a company is going to scrimp on a tool their employees use every day to make them money, it's probably not somewhere I want to work. What's kept you with this company throughout the years? Oh, I'm interviewing you to take over my position. This place sucks. Between the murders and the German Shepherd-sized rats I can't get out of here quick enough. You sign those forms yet? Hurry along before the taskmaster makes his rounds. Toward the end of the interview, when asked if I have questions, I usually say something like, yes, I do have some questions, but before I ask, is there anything I can clarify further or anything you'd like me to expand upon? This gives me a chance to engage them in any potential gaps in my answers to their questions. Then I usually ask something like this if it hadn't already been stated. What does success look like in the first 6 months for me in this role? What major project work is planned in the first year for this position? What are some of the goals I will want to achieve in that time? I usually ask about the timeline of the interview process too, so that I know when to follow up. And I always send a thank you email to anyone involved, the recruiter, hiring managers, etc. I've always wanted to pull out a list when it's my turn to ask questions and start asking open-ended questions like, describe a time you had to deal with an unruly employee and what steps did you take to resolve the issue. So, do you think Israel's current foreign policy regarding Hezbollah and Hamas is hypocritical due to their own former history as paramilitary groups operating out of the Mandate of Palestine? What is your spaghetti policy? Always. What do you like, love about this company? What can I do in my first 30, 60, 90th days that will most help you and your team? How will you measure my success in this role? What skills are most valuable to be successful in this position? Was this role previously filled or is it new? What did the last person in the role do well? What did they do badly? What do you want to start doing or stop doing, and how can I help you do that? Never. What time do we get out, leave? What benefits do you offer? How many vacation days do I get? Is there free food? Once I asked if I were not to be chosen for this position, what would be some things I could work on to better fit? They were stumped and actually told me nothing. That I was perfect for the job. I got it. But they also said that was one of the best questions they'd been asked. I am a recruiter. Before you even start the interview, figure out who you are talking to and then figure out what type of conversation they expect. Do a search and see if you're talking to a recruiter or someone who is on the team. I interview engineers all the time and I don't know a lot of the technical terms. I basically just make sure they have the basic qualification and have a salary within the range. Then send them to the next stage. Save your stories for someone who can appreciate it. Your first point of contact may be looking for basics, and by giving them a 10 minutes answer to a question when they were looking for a 30-second answer may make it so the recruiter misses the important information. I left a job with an extremely toxic work environment, where I jumped into a workplace that had coworkers thriving off of gossip and negativity. Now, I'm always sure to ask things like, what is the work environment like here, on a regular basis? Or what are some of your favorite things about this workplace, and its people? What is the work environment like here, on a regular basis? Or what are some of your favorite things about this workplace and its people? As an interviewer, this will always get you politically correct answers and cherry-picked picture to paint the situation in good light. A better question would be, in your opinion, what are some parts of the company culture and working style that should be improved? Ask this to all interviewers, and listen intently, and hopefully you'll get some common signals. So, you come here often? There's some pretty bad advice here. The answer you're looking for probably isn't the one you're going to enjoy the most. But the answer really is it depends. Interviewing with someone who's 25 and been there for 2 years. Yeah, you can ask him, her about happy hour and vacation days. But it's also about reading the person. If they're talking only about work and not about work-life balance, then don't bring it up. However, the best questions that will make you stand out as a wow are the ones that clearly show research. As a general rule, never ask questions that you can easily Google. Never ask questions that show your intention is laziness, trying to get out the easy way, etc. For example, I always like to ask questions about recent regulations, contemporary issues, and phrase it as it's my understanding that X because Y. Do you think Z affects this? These are the questions that are going to make the interviewer reflect and be able to go back to that meeting afterwards and be able to say, wow, this candidate asked this great question. At the end of the day, being successful at work is sometimes only about asking great questions, and showing this strength by researching and thinking critically in the interview can exhibit this. Ask where the restroom is before leaving. Is it clean, dirty, something you can tolerate? Bathrooms speak volumes. There's usually somebody on the interview committee that has been at the company for a decade or more. I am always sure to ask them what made you stay so long and continue to stay with the institution. Lots of times they are puzzled and it looks like they are questioning it themselves. This thread, like any thread about interviews, resumes etc., simply reveal that there is no universal ideal and each hiring manager is going to be different. Professional development and education opportunities. To show you're invested in the role and career pathway. As a CEO, don't expect to be able to ask specific questions. Ask questions as you go that are real curiosities. Know your audience and respond accordingly. In many interviews, the top comment questions will be awkward. Just be an inquisitive person. At the end, you'll often be asked if you have any questions, and that's a good time to ask, is there any reason you are considering to not hire me? My husband had given me this advice and I was nervous but did it, and I landed a job I for sure wouldn't have if I did not ask this question. She was a bit shocked but not in a bad way, and then she answered me as honestly and bluntly as I asked. She told me that she thought my interview went well but that she had other candidates more qualified, and they really were. It was a factory position for medical devices that required welding, and I have never welded a day in my life. Barely have experience with tools even. She also mentioned appreciating my initiative. We ended the interview well and not but a couple days later she called me and let me know that I was hired and that she would have all of my training provided so that I could even learn to weld. What's the turnover rate for this position? What is the reason people leave this job? If they panic at this question or fumble it, that's a bad sign. Good answers include, they get promoted, or this is an entry-level position and they moved on after getting experience, went sideways to another department, etc. If I asked you to hire me, would your answer be the same as the answer to this question? Checkmate. 1. What will you expect me to have accomplished in 3 months? 6 months. 2. What professional development, continuing industry training or conference or networking opportunities will I have? Always ask if there are any concerns about your resume or qualifications. It will open up conversation they will likely be too polite to mention, and give you the chance to change minds on something they may have written you off for without asking. How strict is your sexual harassment policy? How strict is your cocaine policy? Towards the end, ask. Shows a willingness to better yourself. Take on new things. At any time when it feels appropriate. If interviewed by a man, compliment his tie, or shoes, cuff links, etc. and ask about them. If interviewed by a woman, earrings, haircut, necklaces, etc. Nothing too permanent or intrusive, but something that shows that you're personable. It okay if I masturbate in here? Do advancements work based on performance? Or are they scheduled at certain points? Are those advancement negotiable based on my performance? Are you a cop? You know you've got to tell me if you're a cop, right? Do you eat children? What would an average day here look like, considering my listed skills? How well do you think I'd fit here? Is your wife single? I'd do a little research on the company and ask a question about it. Show you're interested in the company. Also maybe ask a question like how long the interviewer has been there. If be more subtle about asking about raises and details about advancement, you might come off as more interested in what they can do for you, not what you can do for them. Do you have any concerns about me as a candidate that I can address right now? I've heard about this question too. Or better yet, is there any reason that you can think of why you would not want to extend me an offer right now, but I think that it just sounds too canned, and a bit pushy. Oof, that sounds way too pushy. What is your policy on after-hours chair sniffing? What does a typical day in my position look like? No. What you do is make them ask the questions you want so you can hit it out the park. If there is a pitcher of water and glass on the table, pour yourself a glass just enough so that it spills over a bit. The interviewer should then say something like, "Are you okay?" Then you cock back and swing. "No, I'm alright. I just always give 110%. My interviews have all been standardized, so asking about the job isn't really useful and it doesn't give me additional points, so I ask if they would like me to clarify any of my previous answers. Sometimes if I'm not too interested in the job, I ask what made my potential future boss interested in their position. For context, I work in government, so that's why interviews are standard, and yes, I apply for jobs just because I'm curious and I often get interviewed. There are more jobs than people to do them in the administration I work for. This obviously depends on when your interview falls during the day, but I always find "do you have any lunch recommendations?" is a good question and can make the panel think about you in the culture rather than just a random applicant. What is the company's stance on the attractiveness of one Danny DeVito? What's your turnover rate of FT associates in the past 12 months in the org and in this department? What's the average tenure of associates within the org? How does the company project its growth over the next 18 to 24 months? What are some of the challenges with the current culture of the organization that you would like to see changed? When was the last time the company harvested an employee's organs? What is day-to-day like? What traits do you value the most in an employee? Third one should be about the company. I always use all these three and the interviewer seemed to like them. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Do you aim for compliance or commitment from your employees? If they want compliance, it might mean they're much more task-oriented to the detriment of the people doing those tasks versus someone who values and respects their employees. Not a good answer at all, but I literally asked in an interview yesterday at a brewery, "Is there anything weird about this job that I should know?" Both interviewers went huh, and asked what I meant. I don't know what I was thinking, but I don't think I got the job face with tears of joy. What are the porn restrictions? What do you wish you had known when you were in my position? Why has this position become available? Have you got pants on? What do you love most about working here? Ask for the business culture and the hierarchy structure. Ask questions to clarify their questions. Make things a dialogue. And I love when interviewing that I get a great question in response. Shows me it's someone who's curious and wants to understand things more.